The silence in the chapel was a heavy blanket, thick with unspoken words and the scent of lilies. It was the kind of silence that's not empty but full of noise. The deafening roar of a life abruptly ended. My husband, Richard, was gone. For 42 years, his presence had been the steady rhythm of my world. His laughter was the bass line, his quiet wisdom the melody. Now there was only this crushing quiet. I sat in the front pew, a statue carved from grief, feeling the sympathetic glances of friends and the calculated, almost impatient presence of my own family. My daughter Amelia sat beside me, but there was a chasm between us wider than the aisle. Her husband, Mark, was on her other side, his hand on her knee, a gesture that looked more like restraint than comfort. Throughout the service, Amelia hadn't shed a tear. Her eyes were dry, her posture rigid. She was performing the role of the grieving daughter, but her heart wasn't in the script. I could feel it, a mother knows. The final prayer was said, and people began to file out, offering me condolences in hushed tones. He was a wonderful man, Elena. So sorry for your loss. Each word was a gentle hand on a fresh wound. I nodded, unable to form sentences, my throat tight with unshed tears. I wanted to be strong for Richard. He had always hated seeing me cry. As the crowd thinned, leaving only the close family, Amelia finally turned to me. The artificial sympathy she had worn like a mask during the service was gone. Her face was cold, her eyes sharp and assessing, as if she were looking at a piece of furniture she was about to discard. "Well, that's that," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Mark stood behind her, a silent, smirking shadow. I looked at her, my own daughter, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cavernous, cool air of the chapel. "Amelia," I started, my voice a hoarse whisper, "your father." She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Mother, please, let's be practical. Dad's gone." She took a small step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, though there was hardly anyone left to hear. Her words were not meant for privacy, but for impact. "You know, without him, you're worth nothing now." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Worth nothing. The air rushed out of my lungs. I looked into my daughter's eyes, searching for a flicker of remorse, a hint of a mistake, but found only cold, hard conviction. She believed it. In her world, a world of status, finance, and appearances, I was merely an extension of her father. Richard was the pillar, the name, the engine. I was just the quiet woman by his side. With him gone, my value had evaporated. Mark chimed in, his voice slick with false pity. "She just means, Elena, that Richard handled everything. We're worried about you. You won't know how to manage." I stared at them, this pair who shared my blood and my name, and I felt a profound and desolate loneliness. In my darkest hour, they weren't offering a hand to hold. They were kicking the stool out from under me. For a moment, the grief threatened to swallow me whole. I wanted to crumble, to scream, to show them how deeply their cruelty had pierced me. But then something else rose through the sorrow. It was a slow, burning ember of anger. It was the memory of every sacrifice I had made, every late night I had spent supporting Richard's dreams, every penny of my own inheritance I had poured into his first business venture, a secret we had kept between us for 4 decades. It was the quiet strength that he had always seen, always cherished, and that our daughter had always been blind to. I straightened my back, lifting my chin slightly. I held Amelia's gaze, my own eyes unblinking. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply let the silence hang in the air, a testament to the weight of her words. A small, sad smile touched my lips, a smile she couldn't possibly understand. She took it as a sign of a broken spirit, of senile confusion. Her own lips curled into a faint, triumphant smirk. She thought she had won. She had established the new hierarchy. She and Mark were in control now. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly fathom, was that the game had just begun. And I was the only one who knew the rules. The real accounting was about to take place, not in a ledger book, but right here, in the cold aftermath of the life they thought had defined me. She would soon discover just how much a woman worth nothing could truly be worth. Our life together, Richard's and mine, hadn't begun with wealth. It began in a tiny, rented apartment with mismatched furniture and a shared dream. I was a librarian, and he was an ambitious junior architect with a sketchbook full of ideas that seemed to defy gravity. We fell in love over dog-eared books and blueprints spread across the floor. My parents, practical people who had built a small but successful manufacturing business from the ground up, were wary of Richard's artistic temperament. "Passion doesn't pay the bills, Elena," my father would say, his hands stained with grease and a lifetime of hard work. But I believed in him. I saw the genius behind his eyes. When my parents passed away unexpectedly in a car accident just 2 years into our marriage, they left me everything. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. It was seed money, it was security. Richard was devastated for me, but he was also hesitant. "I can't take your family's money, Elle, I have to make it on my own." That was when we made our pact. It wasn't his money or my money. It was our future. I proposed a structure. I would use my inheritance to establish a holding company, a silent, legal entity that would be the true owner of our assets. He would be the face of it, the president of the architectural firm we would build. He would have full operational control, a generous salary, and the public acclaim. but the ultimate ownership, the final say, would remain with the trust, and I was its sole trustee. It was a private arrangement, a safety net I created not out of a lack of trust in him, but out of a deep understanding of the world my father had taught me about. Always protect the foundation, he used to say. Richard agreed. He was a brilliant architect, not a shrewd businessman. He was relieved to focus on his designs. And so, Clayton and Associates was born. Publicly, it was Richard Clayton's firm. Privately, it was built on my foundation. Over the years, the firm flourished. We bought our beautiful home, we traveled, and we had Amelia. From the beginning, Amelia was Richard's princess. He doted on her, gave her everything she wanted. I was the one who insisted on chores, on manners, on understanding the value of things. She saw me as the obstacle, the disciplinarian, while her father was the source of all good things. As she grew older, this perception solidified. She saw her father signing checks, running the company, making the grand decisions. She saw me managing the house, volunteering at the school library, and tending my garden. She equated visibility with power, and my power was invisible to her. When she married Mark, it only got worse. Mark was a man obsessed with status. He saw Richard as a figure of immense success and attached himself to the family business like a remora to a shark. He was charming on the surface, but I saw the avarice in his eyes. He encouraged Amelia's view of me as a relic. "Your mother is from a different time," I once overheard him telling her. "She doesn't understand modern finance." I never corrected them. Richard and I had our private smiles, our shared secret. "Let them think what they want," he'd whisper to me at night. "Our strength isn't for them to understand. It's for us." We thought it was a harmless delusion, a generational misunderstanding. We never imagined it would curdle into such profound, venomous disrespect. The first real signs of the storm to come appeared during Richard's illness. The cancer was aggressive, stealing him from me piece by piece. During those final months, Amelia and Mark's visits became less about comforting their father and more about assessing their future inheritance. They would walk through our home, the home I had lovingly decorated and filled with memories, and speak in hushed, urgent tones. "This wallpaper is so dated," Amelia would say, running her hand along the silk wall covering in the dining room. "The first thing we'll do is gut the kitchen." "The property value in this neighborhood has skyrocketed," Mark would add, peering out the window at the garden I spent hours in. "We could easily get 3, maybe 4 million for this place." They spoke as if I weren't even in the room. They saw me as part of the dated wallpaper, a fixture to be removed during the renovation of their lives. I tried to speak to Amelia once, my heart aching. "Amelia, your father is still with us. Can we please not talk about this now?" She looked at me with a flash of annoyance. "Mother, it's called planning. Someone has to be the adult here. You're too emotional to think clearly." The apathetic cruelty was a constant presence. One afternoon, while Richard was sleeping, I found them in his study, going through his desk drawers. Not searching for a stamp or a piece of paper, but methodically opening files, looking at bank statements. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rage. Mark slammed a drawer shut, a flush creeping up his neck. Amelia, however, was defiant. "We're just trying to get a handle on the finances, Mother, to make things easier for you when the time comes." "The time has not come," I said, my voice dangerously low. "This is your father's private study. Get out." They exchanged a look, a shared glance of condescending pity. It was the look you give a child who doesn't understand what's best for them. They left the room, but the violation lingered in the air. They were vultures circling, waiting for the last breath. Their most egregious act came the week before Richard passed. He was lucid but weak. He wanted to see his grandson, their 5-year-old son, Leo. "Just for a few minutes, Elle," he'd pleaded. "I want to see my boy." I called Amelia. "Your father is asking for Leo. Could you bring him by this afternoon?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Mother, I don't think that's a good idea. We don't want Leo to see his grandpa like this. It could be traumatic for him." "It would mean the world to his grandpa," I said, my voice tight. "Well, Leo has a playdate he's really been looking forward to. We can't just cancel. We'll try to swing by tomorrow," she said dismissively. They never came. The next day, Richard was less responsive. The moment had passed. He died without seeing his grandson one last time because of a playdate. The thought of it was a shard of glass in my heart. They had denied my dying husband his last simple wish, not out of concern for their son, but for their own convenience. Their selfishness was a bottomless pit. And so, when Amelia stood before me in that chapel, minutes after we had laid her father to rest and uttered those words, "You're worth nothing now," it wasn't just an insult. It was the culmination of years of disrespect, of being overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed. It was the final, arrogant declaration of a war they didn't even know they were fighting. They had seen my silence as weakness, my grief as incompetence. They were about to learn in the most public and permanent way possible how devastatingly wrong they were. The wake was to be held back at our home, my home. As we prepared to leave the chapel, I saw Amelia whispering to Mark, a smug, proprietary look on her face. They thought they were heading back to their new castle. The drive from the chapel to the house was a blur of gray streets and somber trees. Amelia and Mark rode in their own gleaming black SUV, while I was driven by David, Richard's oldest friend and our family lawyer for 30 years. David had been there when the trust was created. He was one of only 3 people on earth who knew the truth, me, him, and Richard. "Alina, are you all right?" David asked, his voice full of genuine concern. He had seen the exchange with Amelia in the chapel. He hadn't heard the words, but he saw the coldness in her eyes. "I will be David," I said, looking out the window. "I need you to be at the house. Can you come straight there?" "Of course, I was planning on it," he said. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "It's not about being ready," I replied, my voice gaining a firmness that surprised even myself. "It's about it being necessary." When we arrived, the house was already filling up. Friends and neighbors mingled, sharing quiet stories about Richard, their voices a low, comforting hum. But Amelia and Mark treated the gathering not as a wake, but as a coronation. Mark was holding court by the fireplace, talking loudly about taking the reins at the company and guiding it into a new era. Amelia was directing people as if she were the lady of the manor, pointing out where to put coats and accepting condolences with a practiced, queenly grace. She even had the audacity to approach me as I stood by the large bay window overlooking the garden. "Mother, I've been thinking," she began, her tone that of a parent explaining a difficult decision to a child. "This house is far too big for you. Mark and I have been talking. We'll find you a lovely little condo, somewhere manageable. We can have this place cleared out and on the market by the end of the month." I simply looked at her. I didn't say a word. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument would have. The final straw, the act that sealed their fate, came not even 20 minutes later. I saw Mark speaking animatedly to a man I didn't recognize. The man was nodding, taking notes on his phone. He then began to walk through the living room, subtly measuring walls with his eyes. He was a real estate agent. They had brought a real estate agent to my husband's wake. In my home, a cold, clear certainty settled over me. There would be no quiet conversation, no private reckoning. They had chosen a public stage for their disrespect, and so I would choose a public stage for their education. I saw David arrive, his briefcase in hand. He caught my eye across the crowded room, and I gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I walked to the center of the living room, where a small marble-topped table held a vase of white roses. I picked up a small silver spoon and tapped it gently against a crystal glass. The light, clear chime cut through the low murmur of conversation. The room gradually fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Amelia and Mark looked annoyed by the interruption to their networking. Amelia shot me a look that screamed, "What do you think you're doing?" "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and clear. "It means so much to me and would have meant so much to Richard to have you here." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the faces of our friends. Then my eyes settled on Amelia and Mark. "In times of grief, a family's true character is often revealed," I continued, the words hanging in the air. "Some rise to the occasion with love and support. Others see it as an opportunity." Mark shifted uncomfortably. Amelia's face tightened. "My daughter Amelia shared some of her practical concerns with me earlier today. She is worried that without Richard I am, and I believe her exact words were, worth nothing." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Several of our oldest friends looked at Amelia with undisguised shock and disgust. Her face, which had been pale, began to flush a deep, blotchy red. "She and her husband, Mark, have already begun making plans for my future," I went on, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "They intend to sell my home, move me into a manageable condo, and take control of the family business. In fact, I believe their real estate agent is among us this very afternoon. Perhaps he'd like to say a few words about the property's excellent curb appeal." The agent, a slick-looking man in a tight suit, suddenly found the pattern on the carpet intensely fascinating. He looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Now all eyes were on Amelia and Mark. They were trapped in a spotlight of shame. "Mother, this is not the time or the place," Amelia hissed, taking a step toward me. "Oh, I believe it is the perfect time and the perfect place," I said, my voice dropping slightly, carrying an authority she had never heard from me before. "Because there are a few fundamental misunderstandings we need to clear up." "David," I gestured to my lawyer, who stepped forward, opening his briefcase. The click of the latches echoed in the dead silent room. "What is this?" Mark blustered, trying to regain some semblance of control, reading the will here. "This is tasteless." "This has very little to do with Richard's will, Mark," David said, his professional tone cutting through the tension. "Although we will get to that. This has to do with the ownership structure of Clayton and Associates and all associated assets, including this house and the portfolio of properties you've likely been dreaming about." David pulled out a thick document bound in a dark blue cover. "This is the founding charter for the EM Properties Trust, established in 1982. He looked directly at Amelia. "Your mother, Alina Morgan, is the founder and sole trustee of this entity. Your grandfather's inheritance was used to create it. This trust, not your father, was the primary shareholder and legal owner of Clayton and Associates. Richard was the president and a salaried employee, a very well-compensated one, but an employee nonetheless. The color drained from Amelia's face. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked as if the floor had just vanished from beneath her feet. Mark stood beside her, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. What are you talking about?" Amelia stammered, turning from David to me. Dad built everything." "Your father was a brilliant architect," I said softly but with an edge of steel. "He was the heart and soul of the company's creative vision, but the foundation, the capital, the ownership, that was always mine. We built it together, but we built it on my land." David continued, his voice relentless. "The house you are standing in is owned by the trust. The vacation home in Aspen is owned by the trust. The stock portfolio that generates a 7-figure annual income is owned by the trust. Your father's will, in fact, is quite simple. He leaves his personal effects and his pension to a leaner. As he was not the owner of the company or the properties, he had nothing else to bequeath." The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Amelia's face, which had been flushed with anger, had now turned a ghostly, waxy white. Her eyes were wide with panic as the reality of the situation crashed down upon her. The power she thought she held, the wealth she thought she was inheriting, had been an illusion, a mirage. She had just insulted, humiliated, and tried to discard the one person who held all the cards. "Now," I said, my gaze locked on hers, "let's talk about the new arrangements." I took a slow, deliberate step towards my daughter. Her eyes, which had held such cold disdain in the chapel, were now filled with a desperate, pleading fear. Mark looked like he was going to be physically ill. "Mark," I said, turning my attention to my son-in-law, his head snapped up, "your position at the company was contingent on your father-in-law's goodwill. As the new, and in fact, original chairwoman of the board, I am terminating your employment, effective immediately. Security will escort you from your office on Monday morning. Please have any personal items cleared out by then." Mark opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. The life of luxury he had married into had just been liquidated. "Amelia," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a profound sadness for the daughter I had lost long ago. "The corporate credit cards you and Mark have been so fond of will be cancelled by the end of this business day. The trust has been subsidizing your mortgage and your car payments for the last 5 years. That support will cease. I suggest you contact your bank on Monday to discuss your new financial reality." She finally found her voice, a choked, pathetic squeak. "Mother, you can't." "I can," I stated simply. "You told me I was worth nothing. You are about to find out what living with nothing is truly like. You disrespected your father in his final days. You disrespected his memory today. And you disrespected me, your mother, in a way I can never forget. This isn't punishment, Amelia. It is a consequence, a natural result of your own actions." I looked around the room at our friends, their faces a mixture of shock and in many cases quiet approval. They had witnessed the cruelty, now they were witnessing the justice. "As for this house," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "you were right about one thing, it is too big for me. I will be selling it. But I will be doing so on my own terms and on my own timeline. You and your husband will have 30 days to find a new place to live." It was then that she finally broke. A strangled sob escaped her lips. The facade of the powerful, in-control daughter shattered, revealing the greedy, terrified child beneath. She turned to Mark, but he couldn't even look at her. He was staring into the abyss of his own ruined ambition. I felt a pang of something, a ghost of maternal instinct, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her cold eyes in the chapel. I had given her 40 years of love, support, and opportunities. She had repaid it with contempt. The well of my compassion for her had finally run dry. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal. The story of what happened at the wake spread like wildfire through our social circle. Amelia and Mark became pariahs overnight. The friends who had once flocked to their dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid them. Mark's termination was the talk of the industry. He was not just unemployed. He was unemployable, branded as a foolish opportunist who had spectacularly misplayed his hand. They tried to reach me, of course. First came the angry, entitled phone calls. Then, as their financial situation grew more desperate, the calls turned into tearful, pleading messages. Amelia left a long, rambling voicemail about how she didn't mean it, how she was just stressed and grieving. But there was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the years of disrespect, only a desperate plea to turn the money back on. I never returned their calls. They were forced to sell their oversized house at a loss and move into a small, cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town. The luxury cars were repossessed. The private school they sent Leo to was no longer an option. Their world, built on the foundation of my money, had crumbled to dust. I, on the other hand, felt a sense of liberation I hadn't realized I was missing. Selling the family home was bittersweet, but it was also a necessary cleansing. I bought a beautiful, modern penthouse apartment with a stunning view of the city skyline. It was mine, filled with my things, reflecting my taste. I reconnected with old friends, I started traveling, and I took over the chairmanship of the board at the company, discovering I had a keen business sense I'd never been allowed to explore. I renamed the company, the Clayton Morgan Group, in honor of both Richard's creative legacy and my foundational strength. About a year later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from Amelia. It was different from the voicemails. It was quiet, humbled, and for the first time it sounded sincere. She apologized for her words, for her actions, for the years of taking me for granted. She didn't ask for money. She simply asked if one day I might be willing to see my grandson, Leo. I thought about it for a long time. The wound was deep, the trust irrevocably broken. I could never have the same relationship with my daughter again. But Leo was innocent in all of this. He was Richard's grandson. He was my grandson. I agreed to meet them at a public park. Amelia and Mark looked diminished. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by worn, simple outfits. The arrogance had been replaced by a weary humility. They looked like they had aged a decade in 1 year. We didn't talk much. I spent my time with Leo, pushing him on the swings and buying him an ice cream. He was a sweet boy, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of his grandfather. I have started to see Leo regularly. It is a fragile, tentative bridge. I provide for his education directly through a trust, ensuring the money can only be used for